Thus far in this two-part video series, we've created an animated bot which has an animation for idle and an animation for walking. And this animation set is looping around through these on this particular bot. What we want to do though is control this bot so that when we use our arrow keys to move the bot, that it will respond with the right animations. So to do that, we need to put some triggers onto these transitions so that they will only run under certain conditions. So let's begin. In the animator, what you need to do is ensure that you have these parameters ticked up here. Then select the plus button, and we're going to create a Boolean value. A Boolean value can be set to true or false. So create the bool and then give it the name is walking. And that will be is walking with a little I and a capital W. Remember, when we do coding or anything with computers, that capitalization is very important. Now, this tick box tells you whether it is true or false. Is walking, when we first start our game, will be false, so we don't have this ticked. So this will be the value that's going to control our little idle walking cycle. So on the transition that's going from idle to walking, we want to put the condition that is walking, which is this parameter, is set to true. So select the transition so that it goes blue. In the inspector, you'll see that you've got a list of conditions. Hit the plus button and that will start adding conditions. Now, we only have one condition, which is walking, and therefore it will just add that automatically. So for this, we want is walking to be true, okay, and that's the default that we've got, so that will be right. So when is walking becomes true in the code, it will trigger this transition to fire, and then the walking animation will start. Now, when we go from walking to idle, it's the other direction, of course, and that will be when is walking becomes false. So click on that transition, and over in your conditions, add is walking, but this time you want is walking to be false to switch it back in the other direction. Now, to set this is walking value to true and false, we need to do that in the code that we've written. So open up the Drive script that was created in the previous video, and we're going to grab hold of that is walking and set it to true and false based on the speed at which our character is walking. So if the translation, which is our forward movement, has a value that's greater than 0, then our character is obviously walking. If it's not greater than 0, then the character is not walking. Or the character might also be walking backwards. Let's start by working with the condition that we're actually moving in a forwards direction. Okay, so you need to first of all have hold of the animation component that's attached to your player. So this animator up here cannot be seen by the code. The code needs to actually create a version of that, and we do that like this. We go animator, anim, and you'll find that this is quite a common thing that we will be doing throughout as we're trying to access the animations that are attached to our characters. Now we want to set this anim here to be pointing at this animation that's attached to our character. So we need to write a little bit of code that will automatically do that for us. And we do that inside a start function. Now, in the last video, we talked about how the update function runs over and over again, and Unity just finds it and does the code inside it. The start function is the same. Unity looks for the start function and it runs it once when the object is created. Now, make sure that these functions are spelt exactly like this with the capitals at the beginning, otherwise Unity won't be able to find them and run them for you. Now, on the start, we're going to go anim equals this.get component, and the component that we are getting is our animator that is attached to the same game object that this script is attached to, and this is the code that we use to do that. So now we have access to this animator and all of these states that are going on in here. So to set up the animations themselves and to trigger that is walking, we can add some code after we've done all the calculations for the movement of the character. And we put in a little logic statement that says if translation is greater than 0, we will be moving forward. Now notice the two squiggly brackets here that are going to block off the code that's only going to run if the translation is greater than 0. So in here we then go anim.set bool, because our value is a Boolean value, is walking, where this has to be spelled exactly the same as this is walking up the top here. So remember to have the capital W. And we're going to set it to true, and that will trigger the walking to begin. And then else, so when the translation is not greater than 0, we're going to set it back to false. And that's how you influence the value of this parameter, which will then influence the way the animation is running. So save that, Control S, and we'll go back to Unity and have a look at the effects of doing that. When we run this, you should expect that when you press the up arrow key to move the character forward, that it's going to trigger this transition here to go into is walking. Okay, so let's just try that out. Let's press the play button. Now I'm going to move backwards first so that we can see that in action. Now I'll press the up arrow key to move forwards. Notice that the idle is still walking for a little while before it goes and plays the walking. Now what's going on here is that this idle animation wants to be in control. It wants to finish itself until it lets you go and do the walking animation. And we don't want that. We actually want our transition and our key press to interrupt that idle animation. So the way you do that is you select the transition, and over in the inspector you'll find that there's has exit time. Turn that off. It's on by default for all of your animations. Turn that off and it'll allow your animations to be interrupted. Okay, so let's now play this again. And I'll just move backwards. Remember, the backwards isn't going to do anything for us, but as soon as I move the up arrow key, we go straight into walking. Now another thing that's happening there is that the walking animation is not looping, and that's because we didn't set it to loop in the same way that idle was set to loop. So we can go down and click on our walking animation here in the project, and over in the inspector we want to find loop time and tick the loop box and then click on apply. And now we should be able to move back, and as soon as I start moving forward we will keep walking, and it will keep looping over and over again. Now he's in the middle also of a walking, and going back to idle he'll keep walking, so we want to turn off the exit sign on that one as well, which is here. Just tick that off, and now this is set up ready to go. Before we continue, it's quite difficult to test his walking unless you're following him around with the camera, which is what you would do in a third person type of game. So we'll set the camera up so that it does follow our character. Now to do that's quite simple. If we go into the scene view and we go into the 3D view and just move around until we have our character pretty much where we might like to be able to see him from the camera. Okay, let's say it's about there. Now once we've set that up, we click the camera and then align it with a view. So go Game Object, Align with View. So in the game you'll be able to see what you're seeing in the scene. Now at this point you might want to move your camera over a little bit and that would be in the X direction. If you want to center the camera, we don't really need to be that fussy, but it's up to you. Now that the camera is in that particular position behind the play, if we press play right now and just hit the up arrow key, the character's going to walk off into the distance. We want the camera to go with the character. So we grab the camera in the hierarchy and drag it down and drop it on top of our Y-bot so that it becomes a child object. Press play, and now wherever the character goes, the camera will go too. So you can see that the character is actually moving in space in the scene view, but in the game, the camera is just staying attached. And in the scene view, you can actually see that camera following the character around. Now, unless you add a ground or some other objects into the scene, it's not going to look like he's actually moving in this game view because there's no point of reference. So we can quickly make one by adding in a ground plane. Right click in the hierarchy and go 3D object plane, and that will create a nice big plane for us, which you might want to drag down and put at the feet of the character. And then if you wanted to make this ground plane a bit bigger so you don't fall off the edge, over in its transform, we can set its X and its Z value to 10, which is going to make it a little bit bigger. Now it's white, which will also give us no point of reference when we're walking around. So we need to put an image on it. So to color this, I've grabbed an image that I found for a texture, and you can do that too. Just find a JPEG or a PNG file. You want to search for something that is a seamless texture, which means it can be tiled across the surface of the object and will fit nicely together. So I just grabbed a metal type tile here that you can see. Now when I run this, the character will actually move and turn, and we'll have a point of reference on that ground, which is quite nice. Now you can also select the light and turn on shadows, which is just down here in the inspector under light shadow type. And if we turn that to hard or soft, depending on the effect that you want, you'll see the shadow. And then when you turn and move your character relative to the direction of the light, you'll also get lighting. And you can see this is working quite nicely now. So he will walk, do the walk animation when we've got the up arrow key, and when we release the key, he will stop and go into idle. Now, at this point, if we go backwards, it's not playing anything because of the code we've written. So we need to tweak it just a little bit. The process requires hooking up another set of parameters between the animator and the code. So in the animator, go in here and add a new parameter, but add a float, and we're going to call this our character speed. And note again the way that you've typed it in, because you'll need the exact spelling. Now this character speed is going to be used as a multiplier for the actual speed of our animation. So if you select the animation state in the animator and then go over to the inspector, you'll see that there's a speed value that we can play around with, and you can add a multiplier to it. If you tick the parameter next to it, okay, so when you get yours initially, it should just have speed of 1 with this multiplier grayed out. Click on parameter and then look for the multiplier that you want. It's going to be character speed, which is based on this character speed here. We're going to run at a speed of 1 and multiply it by whatever this character speed gets set to. That will get set in the code. So go back to the code, and now we're going to modify this if translate is greater than 0, and we're actually going to say if it's not equal to 0, so that the code inside here is going to run if we're going forward in a positive translation or if we're going backwards in a negative translation. And the translation value we'll actually use to set the speed. So we can go anim.setFloat character speed, spelt exactly the same, and then a value. And we'll use translation itself as the actual value because it's going to be negative or positive based on the direction that we're going in. Now, otherwise, we're going to end up going back to is walking, being false. And when that happens, we probably want to set our speed boolean also down here and set it back to 0, so we're not actually having that walking animation at any particular speed. So save that and switch back into Unity and press play. Now, if you press the up arrow key, you'll notice that we're walking, but we're walking very slowly in the forward direction. And then if we press the down arrow key, our animation is actually running backwards, you'll notice, but also, again, very slowly. Right, so to fix that, stop playing, go back to your walking in place animation. And over here with the speed, we actually run it a little bit faster. So let's dial that up to 5 and then play and see how that goes. So 5's not too bad. If the character looks as though he's skating a little bit on the ground, it means that we need to increase the speed of the animation. If we put that up to 10 and play it, it's probably going to be a little bit too fast. It's not too bad. It could probably go down to 8 and still be all right. And then when we walk backwards, we're now playing our animation backwards, which gives us the illusion of going backwards. Okay, so that's how to set up our script that's connected to our character, which then drives this animator and these animation states so that you can get some natural movement between idle and walking.